When I saw the aging bikers thunder through Millfield every Memorial Day at dawn, heading somewhere secret that no one in town could explain, I knew there was a story waiting to be told. As a young reporter struggling to save my job at the failing Tribune, I decided to follow them despite warnings that they didn't like company. You won't believe what happened next. I never expected to discover they'd been visiting the grave of a forgotten foster kid who died in army training, or that their 40-year promise to honor him would teach me everything about what real family means. Sometimes the most powerful stories are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to follow the mystery to its heart. Hi everyone, welcome to Life's Changing Stories. Now let's dive into today's story. The cramped newsroom of the Millfield Tribune felt smaller every day as circulation numbers dropped and advertising revenue disappeared, leaving Harriet Winter increasingly desperate to prove her worth as the youngest reporter on a staff that had been reduced from 12 employees to just 4 over the past 2 years. At 26, Harriet had been working at the struggling local newspaper for 18 months since graduating from journalism school, watching helplessly as the internet and social media destroyed the traditional business model that had sustained small-town papers for generations. Harriet's editor, Bill Martinez, had made it brutally clear during their most recent staff meeting that everyone needed to produce content that would make people feel something again and give readers a reason to renew their subscriptions rather than getting their news from free online sources. The Tribune was hemorrhaging money, and unless they could generate some compelling human interest stories that would capture the community's attention and demonstrate their value as a local institution, the paper would likely close before the end of the year. Every Memorial Day, for as long as anyone in Millfield could remember, the same group of aging bikers had roared through the quiet downtown streets at dawn, their motorcycles creating a thunderous procession that woke the entire town before disappearing into the surrounding mountains for reasons that no one had ever been able to explain or discover. The bikers were always the same men, fewer each year, their hair whiter, their leather jackets more weathered, but their annual ritual remained unchanged and mysterious. Local residents had developed dozens of theories about where the bikers went and why they maintained this decades-old tradition, but no one had ever followed them or attempted to solve the mystery that had become part of Millfield's folklore. Some people speculated they were visiting a secret motorcycle rally, others thought they might be conducting illegal activities, and a few romantic souls suggested they were honoring fallen friends at a private memorial service. Harriet had been fascinated by the mysterious bikers since her first Memorial Day in Millfield, watching from her apartment window as they assembled in the parking lot of Murphy's Diner before riding out in perfect formation toward the winding mountain roads that led away from town. This year, with her job security hanging by a thread and her editor demanding stories that would resonate with readers, Harriet decided to take the risk of following the bikers to uncover the truth behind their annual pilgrimage. Frank Wilson, the Tribune's aging photographer who had been documenting Millfield's history for 30 years, warned Harriet that the bikers were known for valuing their privacy and didn't appreciate curiosity from outsiders. They don't much like company, he told her, adjusting his camera equipment while reviewing contact sheets from previous assignments. Been riding through here since before you were born, and nobody's ever gotten close enough to find out where they're going. Despite Frank's warnings and her own nervousness about confronting a group of intimidating motorcycle riders, Harriet was determined to solve the mystery and write the kind of compelling human interest story that might save both her job and the newspaper's future. Harriet Winter stood outside Murphy's Diner at 5:30 a.m. on Memorial Day, her small Honda Civic parked discreetly across the street, while she watched the Thunder Road Motorcycle Club members arrive one by one for their annual gathering. At 26, she had been working as a reporter for the Millfield Tribune for less than 2 years, but she understood that investigative journalism required taking calculated risks to uncover stories that mattered to the community. The bikers ranged in age from their late 50s to early 70s, their motorcycles representing decades of careful maintenance and obvious pride in their machines. Despite their intimidating appearance, leather jackets, grey beards, and the natural authority that comes from years of riding powerful motorcycles, Harriet noticed they conducted themselves with dignity and respect, greeting each other warmly and organizing their departure with military precision. At exactly 6 a.m., the lead rider started his engine, and the others immediately followed suit, creating a symphony of mechanical power that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Harriet waited until they had traveled several blocks before starting her car and beginning what she hoped would be a discreet pursuit that would finally solve Millfield's most enduring mystery. The winding mountain road that led away from Millfield required careful navigation, especially when trying to maintain a safe following distance behind a group of experienced motorcycle riders who knew the route intimately. Harriet struggled to keep the bikers in sight while avoiding detection, using turnouts and overlooks to monitor their progress as they climbed steadily into the forested hills surrounding the valley. After nearly 40 minutes of challenging driving, the motorcycle procession turned onto a narrow gravel road that Harriet had never noticed during her previous explorations of the area. A weathered wooden sign indicated they were entering Restwood Cemetery, a much larger burial ground than Harriet had expected to find in such a remote location. Harriet parked her car at the cemetery entrance and proceeded on foot, using mature oak trees and granite monuments for cover while observing the bikers' behavior from a respectful distance. The men had gathered in a perfect semicircle around a single grave, each carrying different items: fresh flowers, small American flags, military ribbons, or medals that gleamed in the early morning sunlight. The ceremony was conducted in complete silence, lasting less than 15 minutes before the bikers returned to their motorcycles and departed in the same organized formation they had maintained throughout their journey. Not a single word was spoken during the entire ritual, suggesting a level of reverence and tradition that had been established over many years of repetition. Using her camera's telephoto lens, Harriet was able to read the inscription on the simple gray granite headstone that had been the focus of the bikers' attention. David Michael Torres, United States Army, died 1985. Back at the Tribune office, Harriet immediately began searching the newspaper's archived files for any references to David Torres or military deaths in 1985. The microfilm archives were stored in the basement, requiring hours of careful examination to locate relevant articles from nearly 4 decades earlier. In the August 1985 editions, Harriet found a brief 2-paragraph article tucked between advertisements for local businesses. Local soldier dies in training accident. The article stated that David Michael Torres, age 19, had died from fatal injuries sustained during a nighttime training exercise at Fort Benning, Georgia, just 6 weeks into his basic training program. The article noted that no local services are planned and that David was survived by his grandmother, Rosa Torres of Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was no mention of other family members, friends, or community connections that would explain why a group of local bikers would choose to honor his memory for decades. Frank Wilson recognized the name when Harriet showed him the article, though his recollection was vague and filled with decades-old gossip rather than verified facts. Torres was a foster kid, Frank said, adjusting his glasses while examining the faded newsprint. Lived rough, got in trouble with the law a few times. Those bikers weren't always the respected veterans you see now. Back then, folks called them troublemakers, and outcasts. Frank's comments suggested there had been some connection between David Torres and the Thunder Road Motorcycle Club, but the nature of their relationship remained unclear. Harriet continued searching through the newspaper's correspondence files, hoping to find additional information that would help her understand the story behind the annual Memorial Day ritual. In a dusty filing cabinet labeled Correspondence Not for Publication, Harriet discovered a large manila envelope containing a faded blue letter dated September 1985. The letter was addressed to a Mr. Jackson from Rosa Torres, thanking him for arranging David's burial and stating, "You were the only family he had in the end. Thank you for loving him when I couldn't." At the bottom of the letter, someone had written in pencil, "J. Presley, Thunder Road, MC." The next morning, Harriet visited the county clerk's office, where she spoke with Sandra Martinez, a longtime employee whose institutional memory of local families and histories was legendary throughout Millfield. Sandra had worked in various county offices for over 30 years and maintained detailed knowledge of births, deaths, marriages, and family relationships that often proved invaluable to researchers and journalists. Sandra confirmed that David Torres had experienced a rough childhood after being abandoned by his mother at age 13 and subsequently placed in a series of foster homes that had failed to provide adequate care or stability. One placement had been particularly traumatic, involving an abusive guardian who had been investigated by social services multiple times before David was finally removed from the situation. The Thunder Road Boys were the ones who gave David refuge when he ran away from that last foster home, Sandra explained, consulting handwritten notes she had maintained in personal files over the decades. They kept him fed, kept him safe, made sure he finished high school when nobody else seemed to care what happened to him. The motorcycle club had apparently served as David's unofficial family during his final years in Millfield, providing guidance, support, and the sense of belonging that traditional institutions had failed to offer. Harriet decided to visit the Thunder Road Motorcycle Club's headquarters, a converted gas station on the outskirts of town that now resembled a veterans' gathering place more than the stereotypical biker clubhouse she had expected. The building was well maintained, with American flags displayed prominently and a small memorial garden visible through the front windows. She was greeted by 3 men, including the oldest member, Jack Presley, who appeared to be in his early 70s and initially seemed suspicious of reporters and their motives. Jack's weathered face and cautious demeanor suggested someone who had learned to be wary of outsiders asking questions about the club's private business. Harriet mentioned the letter from David's grandmother to J. Presley, which immediately changed the atmosphere of their conversation. Jack confirmed that he had been the club's president when David Torres died and had handled the arrangements for his burial and military honors. "Our old president passed away 5 years ago," Jack said, studying Harriet's credentials and trying to determine whether she could be trusted with sensitive information. Doug Jackson was the one who got that first call from David's grandmother. She couldn't handle the arrangements herself. Too far away, too poor, too heartbroken. Harriet's honest admission that the Tribune was struggling financially, but that she had recognized something true and real in the biker's silent vigil, finally convinced Jack to invite her inside and share the complete story of David Torres and the Thunder Road's 40-year promise. Inside the clubhouse, photographs covered the walls, images of young men in military uniforms, group pictures from decades of motorcycle rallies, and faded snapshots of a skinny teenager with dark hair and a shy smile who was clearly David Torres. The decorations suggested a group of men who took pride in their military service and maintained strong bonds of loyalty and brotherhood. Jack explained that David had appeared at the clubhouse when he was 17, hungry and sporting a black eye from his latest confrontation with an abusive foster father. Though the Thunder Road members were rougher around the edges in the 1980s and had reputations as troublemakers, they maintained a strict code. Take care of your own. David became the club's unofficial mascot and responsibility, sleeping in the clubhouse when necessary, earning money through odd jobs arranged by club members, and receiving the guidance and protection that had been missing from his official placements. The bikers taught him motorcycle maintenance, self-defense, and the importance of finishing his education despite the chaos in his personal life. At 18, David enlisted in the army, believing that military service would give him structure, purpose, and the opportunity to prove his worth to a world that had largely ignored or rejected him. He was also hoping that his service might eventually lead to reconciliation with his grandmother, who had been unable to care for him after his mother's abandonment. 6 weeks into basic training, David Torres died instantly when he fell into a ravine during a nighttime navigation exercise at Fort Benning. The accident was ruled unavoidable, but his death left his Thunder Road family devastated and determined to ensure that his sacrifice would not be forgotten. Doug Jackson received the phone call from David's grandmother, who was financially unable to travel to Georgia or arrange for proper burial services. The Thunder Road Motorcycle Club covered all expenses and arranged for David to be buried with full military honors in the family plot at Westwood Cemetery, though his grandmother never attended the funeral or visited his grave afterward. "We made a pact that Memorial Day," Jack said, his voice heavy with emotion after nearly 4 decades of carrying this responsibility. "Every year we'd stand for David because nobody else would. Kids like him grow up thinking nobody gives a damn whether they live or die. We wanted to prove that wrong, even if he never knew it." The Thunder Road had maintained this ritual for 39 years, even as their membership dwindled and age made the mountain ride increasingly difficult. They brought fresh flowers, military honors, and the promise that David Torres would not be forgotten by the men who had been his only real family. Harriet wrote, "The Ghost Riders of Westwood, a Brotherhood's Promise," which ran as a full-page feature story on the front page of the Millfield Tribune. The article told David's complete story, from his troubled childhood through his death in military service, and explained the Thunder Road's decades-long commitment to honoring his memory. The story resonated deeply with Tribune readers, leading to a significant increase in subscription renewals and prompting many longtime Millfield residents to share their own memories of David Torres and the Thunder Road Motorcycle Club. Harriet received dozens of letters, emails, and phone calls from people who remembered David from high school, neighbors who had witnessed the bikers' care for him, and former teachers who confirmed his academic struggles and ultimate success in graduating despite his chaotic home life. The mayor's office contacted Harriet about commissioning a memorial bench at Westwood Cemetery to officially recognize David Torres and the men who had kept his memory alive for 4 decades. Local veterans organizations expressed interest in participating in future Memorial Day ceremonies, and several community members offered to help maintain David's grave throughout the year. Jack Presley, still gruff but obviously moved by the community's response, told Harriet, "You wrote it for David." Made sure someone besides a bunch of old bikers would remember his name. He presented her with David's tarnished army lapel pin and asked her to keep the story alive when we're gone. Jack also revealed that after Harriet's story was published, the Thunder Road had received a letter from David's grandmother, Rosa Torres, who was battling terminal cancer in Albuquerque. In her letter she wrote, "I wasn't ready to love him then, but I never stopped hoping someone else would. Thank you for finding him. Thank you for keeping him." The letter had changed something for the boys and provided the closure they had been seeking for nearly 40 years. A month later, Harriet discovered a hand-carved wooden sign at the cemetery entrance. Restwood Memorial Garden, a place for those who had no one until they did, commissioned by the Thunder Road Motorcycle Club as a permanent tribute to David Torres and others who had been forgotten by traditional families but remembered by chosen ones. The story taught Harriet about the enduring power of certain promises and loyalties that transcend conventional definitions of family and obligation. The Ghost Riders of Restwood were fewer each year, but their promise to David would endure long after the last motorcycle fell silent. Harriet realized that preserving and sharing this story had become her promise too, ensuring that David Torres and the Thunder Road's commitment to honoring forgotten soldiers would continue to inspire future generations to recognize that family is defined by love and loyalty rather than biology or legal relationships. Sometimes the most important stories are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to follow the mystery to its heart and discover the profound human truths that connect us all. We hope you enjoyed today's story of love, life, and betrayal. For more free stories and entertainment from our channel, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe with notifications.